My name is Ron Frankel. I am the president and founder of Proof Inc. We are a visualization company based in Los Angeles with offices in London, Sydney, and Vancouver. So for Star Trek Beyond, we had worked with Justin Lin on Fast and Furious 3, 4, 5, and 6. He was then given the reins of Star Trek Beyond, and we got the phone call, I would say, probably December of 2014. Giving us a heads up that he was starting work on Star Trek and that we were going to be pulled into that sometime in January. So in about the middle of January 2015, we started with the previs team on Star Trek Beyond. That team was basically there from essentially day one of production while the script was still being written, and through to this day, now that we are in late April of 2016, we still have artists working on it, and we'll have them working on it pretty much, not up until the day the film comes out, but maybe for another month or so. So we've really tracked this project from its infancy all the way through essentially to release. We started with a previs team based in LA, working with the director and the entire film crew. They filmed the project up in Vancouver, so we sent a splinter unit up to Vancouver to continue working with the filmmakers, while the bulk of the team remained in Los Angeles doing a lot of the animation work for the previs, prevising basically all of the big major action set pieces. Some really elaborate work. There's some really amazing sequences being kind of conceived for this new Star Trek film, and a lot of effort and work went into the previs to really make sure these sequences were going to be kind of new and exciting, and as always, looking for that thing that you haven't seen before, especially within the Star Trek franchise. Once production came back to LA after Vancouver, which would have been, I guess, August or September of last year, we started postvis, and we've been engaged in a very extensive postvis project, working with editorial, turning around quick temp comps for them to cut with, and at the same time generating new previs for reshoots and to flesh out the story for some of the all CG sequences. So it's been this really fantastic hybrid previs, postvis, kind of do it all kind of effort in order to really put the story together and make sure that it is the most exciting Star Trek that we've seen. So the late in the game previs, which needs kind of a new name, right? Because it's no longer previs, it's not really postvis. It's been an interesting kind of evolution. A lot of times, especially as we get into postvis and we get kind of deeper and deeper into the post schedule, there are those moments, especially for a big science fiction film like Star Trek, where you have lots of all CG sequences. You're out in space, you got the spaceships, you're flying through, whatever alien planets you're flying through. A lot of times those sequences might be handed over to the visual effects vendor and just kind of say, hey, here, we're gonna have this all CG sequence. Oftentimes what we're discovering now is that those sequences are staying in-house with production, and we're essentially becoming the animation department and designing those sequences with the director, with the editor, really getting down to first pass, sometimes even second and third pass animation. So what gets handed over to the vendor is not the kind of, hey, here's a rough guide previs of what this CG sequence kind of could or should look like. What's being handed over are these very elaborate, tightly choreographed templates of these are the CG shots that we want. This is the choreography of events. These are the elements that should be in there. Maybe we don't have all of them. Maybe we don't have the animation and not kind of all the final character animation or all the final effects animation. We certainly don't have all the lighting information in there. But it is a very elaborate blocking pass that the vendor can then use as their kind of jumping off point for the final production. And in most of those instances where we're taking it to that degree of polish, we're handing over the scene file to the vendor. So they don't just get an image, they don't just get a quick time of what the shot should look like, they actually get the Maya scene file as the jumping off point for their work. So they can take that and kind of do with it whatever they might. I know in some instances those scene files just get ingested right into their pipeline. In other instances, they get used as kind of 3D reference and rebuilt. But we're trying to give the vendors as much information. If we're doing all this decision making with the director for all these weeks and months of post-production and getting that animation as fine-tuned as it is, we want to give the vendors, as much of an advantage as possible. So with Star Trek Beyond, our initial priority was to focus on the big stunt action scenes that were going to be filmed practically. Things that involve stunts, things that involved actors, things that involve practical effects. So the previs really focused on those areas because they were going to go shoot and they wanted as much information and make as many decisions as they could before actually getting on set and filming the shots. For the big kind of CG portions of it, we did good blocking passes for the previs, but we didn't really get into in-depth kind of design because we knew that we would circle back to those areas once it got to post. So in the pre-production previs, we kind of did good passes for the kind of all CG moments and really focused on what was going to be filmed practically. And then once it came back to post for postvis, we then went back to revisit those CG sequences and really develop them and really flesh them out in much more detail. In Star Trek Beyond, in truth, there was not much in terms of virtual production. Justin is really kind of, I'd say, an old school filmmaker, and he likes to go out there with a camera and just shoot. You know, Proof has been doing some phenomenal virtual production work on some of our other shows. Here at FMX, we presented work that we did on Pan and Gods of Egypt, both of which made extensive use of virtual production. On Pan, we had a number of sequences where we were using similar idea where the previs was being taken to a high level of finish in terms of the quality of the animation. And the reason for that was that animation was being used to drive a motion control camera and a robotic arm. So we're actually using the previs to design animation that then is going directly into the robotics and being executed on stage. So again, the previs really is, beyond previs, it's the kind of approved animation pass. And what's happening on stage is just executing that shot and making it, you know, that's the polished version. On Gods of Egypt, we ended up doing big, you know, heroic, epic Egyptian mythology, massive environments, you know, 3-meter tall gods. We ended up doing a lot of on-set visualization for that film because what they had to shoot with were just minimal sets on blue screen. So it became really important to take the previs work that we had done and bring it onto the stage so that the director, Alex Proyas, and the DOP, Peter Menzies, could really see the scope and scale of the environments that they were working within, because what they had to frame off of practically was really just a very small part of the overall scene. So we were using on-set visualization for that one. I would say the pressure, you know, working on a film like Star Trek Beyond or any of these big Hollywood productions, I think the pressure for us as well as for everyone else on the production is pretty much the same from day one. It's a high pressure environment. The challenges definitely evolve over time. You know, the challenges in the early days of pre-production are really about creativity and coming up with ideas and expressing the ideas of the director and really creating these kind of just phenomenal cinematic experiences. As you move closer to production, the pressure becomes, you know, time becomes a factor. You know, they're 3 days out from shooting, they're 1 week out from shooting, and we're supposed to give them some technical information about what that shot is, how fast the camera is moving, how big the green screen is. So it suddenly becomes the kind of the pressure cooker of time and deadlines and getting them the information that they need so that they can take the previs work that we've done and, you know, use that as the foundation for and as a guide when they get on set to start filming. And then once we move into post-vis, you know, it's the just mad dash of turnarounds from editorial, where editorial is throwing plates at us and we're turning around temp comps, you know, as fast as we can. It's a little bit like being a short order chef, because the whole point is that they want to play around, you know, they being the editor and the director, they want to play around with different shots, different plates, different takes. But when a lot of the stuff is shot on green, it's really hard to evaluate whether anything is truly working for the narrative of the film. So at that point, we are just churning out shot after shot after shot. And then as time goes on, you know, those early comps are really rough, real kind of temp comps and slap comps. You know, as the director's cut starts to kind of, you know, formulate, as everything kind of starts to solidify, they start moving into test screenings. And suddenly we're being asked to now kind of step up the quality of the temp comps, because they want them to look a little bit nicer for test screenings, because it's always a little bit better, you know, if the comps look a little bit more polished, look a little bit more finished, that they're not quite as visually jarring when you're watching the screenings. And then, you know, at the point that we start doing the kind of the nicer post-vis comps for the test screenings, our teams are actually usually starting to do some finish shots. They'll start to hand over some paint outs and cleanups and wire removals, just the simple shots that are coming out of editorial that they know that need to be fixed. So suddenly our team is now kind of delivering final shots in the mix as well, especially as we get closer to screenings, because as you get close to a screening, there's a big crush of work, and then it all disappears while it goes off for the screening and while everyone formulates their notes. We usually have a few days, maybe a week of downtime while we're waiting for notes to come back. And usually in those gaps, we'll start to do some roto work and some paint out work. So yeah, I mean, the pressure is just there from day one. The fun part truly is that, you know, the thing has this kind of a life cycle from beginning to end where, you know, the challenges don't necessarily change on any given day, but they slowly evolve and morph over the course of the production. And we change the staffing of the team. The team that starts a project like that is not the team that finishes a project, because the skill sets change. And so it's always kind of a fun event to try to figure out, you know, when we swap out, you know, when the modelers kind of start rolling off the show and the animators start coming on, when the animators start rolling off the show and the compositors start coming on. So yeah, it's always kind of this constant evaluation of what is it that we're doing right now, what are the big challenges, what's production expecting next, and how can we be best prepared to deal with all those things so that as it happens, we're not caught wrong-footed.